Okay, so we're heading into our next assignment, and that's going to be what I'm calling portraits people. You'll start to realize that as I go through these pictures that I'm going to share, some of them look more like traditional portraits, and some of them kind of look more like, like documentary, environmental photographs of people. And you'll probably be able to figure out the difference, and I'll be talking about the difference along the way. But moving forward, you'll start to probably, I think, develop an idea of the subtle differences and crossovers between these two different ideas of photographing people, traditional portraits and more environmental. So I'm going to cover quite a large array of photographers, and it's not necessarily in order of date, but I am starting with someone who was born in the very early 1800s, named Julia Margaret Cameron. So Julia Margaret Cameron, of course, was photographing in the mid 1800s and was using a older style of photography, using film, using a large format camera. It was a much more tedious process. They had to have really long exposures, which is why when you see really old pictures, sometimes you can actually see that the eye was blinking because the exposures had to be long just because of the materials that they were working with at the time. Um, Julia Margaret Cameron, I think I only have these two pictures of hers. There's not a ton of pictures that she made, but she started to make photographs that were a little more whimsical. They were based off of fairy tales or stories, and they kind of had that vibe, fables type of thing going on, like this image here. So that wasn't really very popular at the time. Like that was happening in painting, but photography in the mid 1800s was still being figured out, and like I've mentioned before, was primarily being used by inventors and scientists because it was a science, right? You had to use all these chemicals and get you're making a picture appear. It was like, magic and science at the same time. So for her to start doing these images of people kind of portraying these different personas was new for the world. So Julia Margaret Cameron, look up her work if you like these. She did a lot of work in this vein here. The next person, I'm going to jump about 100 years to Irving Penn, and I'm jumping about 100 years because there's a lot more interesting stuff that started to happen in the mid 1900s and on. Uh, Irving Penn was known for this specific setup that he did. He built these two walls with a very narrow angle that could be adjusted, but he would bring people into his studio and photograph them in this corner. And it was a really lovely way to diffuse light and create an atmosphere. He did other kind of portraits too, kind of traditional, like posing people or having different groups come in and find their place in the picture. Uh, and you can see the kind of detritus down here on the ground. It wasn't meant to look perfect. It was just meant to be a space for people to be themselves in. So Diane Arbus she's no longer alive, but she was a very famous artist for the time that she was with photography. She photographed what she was around, and the people that she was around were primarily marginalized and people that you weren't seeing a lot of photographs of. Um, it's been pretty common throughout all of time for the images that we see of people to fit a very specific standard. And Diane Arbus was not as interested in photographing the common idea of what a pretty picture or pretty person was supposed to look like. She said, "These were my people, This is who I want to photograph, and this is the life I live. These are the people that I see. This photograph gets me every time. This photograph, very, very important photograph, is talked about widely still. It is a crazy boy with a grenade. Let me see here. Yes, I do include the contact sheet because the contact sheet is wildly important. And I'm referring to the contact sheet, which you've heard me talk about in exporting recently from Bridge. A contact sheet, when we were using film, would be taking the whole sheet of negatives and laying them down on photographic paper and shining light through it so that you get a positive on the paper from the negative. So this picture is insane. The boy's holding a toy grenade. He's in public. He's in a park. He's a small white boy. Dangerous. This kid just looks dangerous, right? Here's the contact sheet from this roll of film. Let me see here. Can I zoom in? Doesn't look like I can zoom in, but if you look over here, here's the boy smiling. Here he is posing kind of normal. Smiley, smiley, smiley. Oh, look what I can do with my feet. This is rare for us to see what led up to the picture being made, because all of this happened and then this happened. So this is important to see the process of how a picture gets made and then which picture gets chosen. Vivian Maier, I believe, may have been brought up in this class at one point earlier. I don't remember off my top of my head right now, but Vivian Maier was a nanny. There's a couple of good there's one good documentary. There's two documentaries, but there's one good one. Vivian Maier was a nanny in Chicago and I think maybe New York, maybe New Jersey. She photographed incessantly, religiously, constantly, and never showed them to anybody and rarely developed them until one day, years after she had died, her work was auctioned off because it was in a storage locker that I believe the rent had expired on, and so, people auction off storage lockers. And her work was found. So here's what I want you to think about with her work. One, pay attention to the images. Look at what she's looking at. She was an amazing, amazing technical photographer and composition and being there for the moment, and just had an incredible eye. But also what I want you to think about is she never chose to show these pictures. Somebody found these pictures, bought them at an auction, and decided to find which ones he thought was important for the world to see. So I've been talking to you a lot about editing, and your choice of how we see the pictures is up to you. You put the pictures out in an order because you want them to be seen in an order. You choose which pictures we see because they're your pictures. You should say which pictures are seen by the world. In Vivian Maier's case, she didn't decide for these pictures to be seen by the world, and here I am showing them to you. But they're important images to look at because she was an incredible, incredible photographer. All of these pictures that we're seeing right now are made from her wandering around in the city and just photographing. She photographed without skipping a beat. She was present for her photography in a way that some of us aren't. Some of us question whether or not we should make a picture, and she would get there into people's faces and just make a picture. And sometimes it was incredible. So Vivian Maier has, if you go to Vivian Maier, type it in Google and pull it up, there's a website created by this person who is sharing her work, and you can see these different categories, and they're really incredible, all of her pictures. She's a really, really wonderful photographer. She didn't shoot that much in color, so I wanted to throw this one in. Primarily black and white. Okay, Richard Avedon. I promise we're going to get to more contemporary stuff, but there's some in the history of photography that are important to talk about, especially when it comes to portraiture. Um, Marilyn Monroe. A lot of us have seen this picture. This picture was made by Richard Avedon. Richard Avedon is a famous photographer. He's no longer with us, but he photographed the famous, the wealthy, the affluent, and the thing I want you to think about looking at this picture is uh, all the other pictures you've seen of Marilyn Monroe and how different this one is, and the power that we have with making a photograph and finding trust with somebody. And maybe they let their guard down a little bit, and you can actually make a photograph that shows something that maybe in this case, a famous person who the world feels like they know, this picture actually maybe shows a different side of them that maybe is more true to them deep down. Or in this case, he's photographing a duchess, I don't remember where she's from, with elephants. So figure out how to make a picture like this happen. Avedon photographed a lot of fashion and was pretty widely famous for fashion photography when he died. But you would find portraits of famous people and also just pictures from fashion, from magazines that he had done for, any magazine you can think of. This is his studio. He worked primarily with natural light, so he had these incredible skylights, and then you could set up a backdrop, and you'd get this really diffused, wonderful light. He also photographed outdoors. Sorry, this picture is really pixely, but here's a picture of him setting up a backdrop outdoors, just taking a piece of big white backdrop and taping it to a wall. That's one way to do it. And here's his camera, big camera, 8x10 negatives, really large negatives, super high quality. This is a photograph of Lee Friedlander. In the Typology, Sequence, and Series lecture that I did, I talked about Lee Friedlander's signs project, where he went through his archive of 50 years and photographed and found all the signs that he had taken pictures of. He has a ton of projects, but that's the one I shared. And I shared this picture because I want to show the difference in how pictures are made. So Richard Avedon made this photograph of Lee Friedlander. And there's Lee Friedlander with his camera around his neck. Lee Friedlander made this photograph right before or after Richard Avedon took this picture. So when you look at these pictures, we see this is the style of Richard Avedon. This is the style of Lee Friedlander pictures. And they were both made within seconds of each other, just facing in different directions. So he works in a way that sees this, and he works in a way that sees this. So I just want to kind of show you like the vast difference in what your interests could be. This is about a person, and this is about actions, movement, people, the chaos of a scene, really photography. What happens when you photograph and you are asking things to be in conversation with each other? How dynamic this really is. Okay. Erika Demon came up in the last lecture, but I just want to bring up some of her early work because I talked about her more recent series called Brown. This is her first series called Silhouettes. I think it's important to note that when she started this series, she one of the strobes, the lights didn't fire, and so she eventually developed the film, saw the pictures as they are here, and realized, oh my God, this is what I want my pictures to look like. So she photographed these silhouettes with the light kind of barely moving around the bodies of the women here. And they're really, really incredible portraits. And here's the Brown series, which I did show earlier. And I've talked about those already, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. For those of you that want to remember the technical, what Erika did